I knew something was off the moment Ava walked past without looking at me. Not a nod, not a smirk, just a flash in her eyes, tight, evasive, and then she was gone. Ava, the CEO's executive assistant, had worked at Virion Health longer than anyone in this building. She was the connective tissue, the first to know everything, and in 4 years, I'd never once seen her walk past my desk without acknowledging me, until today. I leaned back slowly, one hand resting on the trackpad. The systems lab around me buzzed as usual, monitors blinking, fingers tapping, but it felt wrong. Like everyone knew something I didn't, like I was 2 seconds behind a conversation that had already changed direction. I minimized my terminal and opened my calendar. Oh, still blank, nothing scheduled. That didn't surprise me. My stand-ups were usually impromptu, but something was off. There was a new alert in our admin dashboard. A room booking. Horizon Conference Room. 9:00 a.m. I pulled up the attendee list. C-suite, product, compliance, strategy, no systems, no engineering, and definitely no me, which made no sense. I had architected the entire back end of Neurodetect, our AI platform for clinical diagnostics. If there was any strategic planning around the system, I should have been in that room. I toggled over to Slack. 3 new private channels created overnight, all locked. No invites, no notifications, all marked with Horizon tags. The unease settled deeper. Footsteps approached. I looked up to see Jenna from Program Ops standing in the doorway, holding a tablet and smiling too brightly. "Hey, Quinn, just a heads up. There's a system-wide freeze window for the next hour. Execs want the servers stable while they run some high-level tests." "Tests?" I asked. "What kind of tests?" She hesitated. "Not sure. I think it's just internal stuff. Shouldn't affect anything on your end." I watched her for a beat. Her hands were tight around the tablet. Her eyes darted once toward the hallway. "Got it," I said flatly. She turned and left. I waited a moment, then opened our server access logs. If someone was testing Neurodetect, I would see it. There it was. A remote login just after 2:43 a.m. into a protected module that hadn't been touched in months, one that only I used. No note, no trace of who approved it. I sat motionless, staring at the line of code. This wasn't paranoia. Someone had accessed my system, and they hadn't told me. I looked up as the Horizon doors closed across the hallway, and for the first time in 7 years, I realized something chilling. Whatever was happening in that room, I wasn't supposed to be part of it. Not anymore. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the not knowing. I stared at the access logs for another minute, hoping some line of metadata would give me a name, a clue, something. But the credentials used at 2:43 a.m. had come from a temporary elevated session, admin authorized, single use, system generated, clean, deliberate. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to not be found. I refreshed Slack again, still locked out of the 3 new private channels. I ran a background check to see who created them. All signs pointed to Ava. So she knew. Of course she knew. Which explained the look she gave me this morning, the flicker of something between guilt and regret. Or was I imagining it now? Filling in the gaps because nothing made sense? I was halfway through drafting a polite but pointed message to our product director when a ping pulled my attention back to Slack. A new post. Public channel. Company announcements. Reminder, please refrain from messaging during the 9 o'clock to 10:30 Horizon strategy session unless absolutely critical. Today's update is key to our growth roadmap. There was a photo attached. Grainy. From inside the conference room. My eyes scanned the faces. CEO, Ava, regulatory, strategy, and there, standing at the front of the room, mid-sentence, gesturing toward a projected slide. A man I'd never seen before, late 40s, Expensive-looking sport coat, confident posture, a slim tablet in one hand, laser pointer in the other, smiling like he owned the place. I tapped the image and zoomed in on the corner of the slide deck. SmartCare 2.0, Foundational AI Integration. I froze. SmartCare was the system I built. A modular clinical assistant trained on hospital workflow, diagnostics, and risk prediction. The phrase foundational AI integration was from my original roadmap presentation, word for word. So who the hell was he? Hey, Quinn! I looked up. Jenna again. She hovered awkwardly at the doorway, hands behind her back like a kid caught sneaking something. What's going on? I asked, sharper than I meant to. She winced. I wasn't supposed to say anything, but I figured you'd want to know. The guy leading the session, his name's Dr. Noah Blake. He's some AI healthcare consultant from Stanford. The CEO brought him in to advise on our platform refresh. I blinked. Refresh? She nodded. Yeah, they're calling it SmartCare 2.0 now. Big rebrand push. Blake's been working with the strategy team for a few weeks, quietly. NDA stuff, I guess. Something in my chest went cold. I stood slowly, mind racing. Is he using our code? My architecture? Jenna hesitated. I think so. His slides have screenshots that look like your system, but with new UI wrappers. It's all pretty high level. And no one told me? Another wince. I thought you were part of it. I couldn't decide if I wanted to laugh or scream. I sat back down as she left, the door clicking shut behind her. Dr. Noah Blake, consultant, strategist, the man explaining my system to an executive room full of people I used to work with, not under, and I hadn't even been invited. I stared at the live feed again, watching Blake point to one of my neural architecture diagrams, now rebranded with slick gradient icons and a new logo in the corner, SmartCare 2.0. Somewhere between insult and theft. I wasn't just out of the meeting, I was out of the loop, out of the room. And if I didn't move carefully, I'd be out of the company. 2. I didn't move for a long time. The conference room across the hall was still full, voices rising faintly through the glass, broken by the occasional ripple of polite laughter. From this distance, it sounded like a celebration. I turned back to my screen, opened a secure terminal, and navigated through the administrative backend of our documentation hub. If Blake had truly been working on SmartCare 2.0, there had to be digital fingerprints, code commits, proposal files, something concrete. 3 directories caught my attention, each one created within the last 2 weeks, all labeled under generic project titles: SC 2.0's Roadmap, Diagnostics/Overhaul, UX Rework, all access limited. But I still had super user privileges, at least for now. I bypassed the locks and opened the first folder. What I found made my breath catch. Dozens of PDFs, slide decks, and internal memos, all outlining a platform redesign nearly identical to what I had proposed 6 months ago. Not similar, identical. My architecture, my neural logic pathways, even the phrasing was mine in places. Awkward technical shorthand I used only in internal drafts. It was the SmartCare expansion I'd built on nights and weekends, refining use cases, improving clinical safety nets, optimizing inference speeds. Back then, the CEO had called it too ambitious, said it would confuse investors. But now it was his initiative, Blake's initiative, and it had a name: Virion SmartCare 2. Redefining predictive healthcare. I clicked through another presentation. There it was, my architecture diagram, copied block for block, except now recolored, rebranded, and stamped with Blake's initials in the revision history. A consultant who hadn't written a single line of code, now leading the implementation of my entire system. I scrolled faster, pulse hammering in my ears, a memo to the executive team, signed by the CEO. Dr. Blake will serve as lead on the SmartCare 2. Zero initiative. His insights have been instrumental in positioning Virion as a frontrunner in adaptive AI diagnostics. Instrumental? He was repackaging my work like it had fallen into his lap from the heavens. Then I found the kicker: a project tracker, timeline, deliverables, launch target, Q2, beta rollout in 3 partner hospitals. Lead: Dr. Noah Blake. System engineer, TBD, like I was never here. Like I hadn't spent the last 3 years building every layer of that framework from the ground up. I sat back in my chair, blinking at the screen as a sick, electric heat rose in my chest. For all their NDAs and quiet meetings, they hadn't even bothered to rewrite the fundamentals, just copied and pasted, and hoped I wouldn't notice. Legacy systems. They'd once called it too rigid, too slow, too quin-shaped. But now that they wanted traction, now that investors were asking for scalable results, they dusted off the very thing they dismissed, renamed it, reassigned it, and handed it to someone else. Outside the glass wall, the conference room burst into applause. Inside, I sat frozen. This wasn't just a theft. It was an erasure, and it was happening in real time. At 10:41 a.m., a calendar invite appeared. Executive debrief, 11 a.m., Office 6C, from Ava, no subject line, no details. Just a time, a room, and a subtle undercurrent of finality. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before clicking accept. Then I stood, straightened my blazer like it might somehow shield me from what was coming, and walked down the hall toward the executive wing, past the smiling department heads exiting Horizon, past whispers that died when I got too close. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered. Office 6C was already open. Jason, our CEO, stood behind his desk, arms folded like a man playing a role he didn't particularly enjoy. Melissa from HR sat in the corner, legal folder already open in front of her, and Dr. Blake, of course, perched on the edge of the side table like he owned the air in the room. "Quinn," Jason said, "thanks for coming in." I didn't sit. "Let's just get to it." Jason exchanged a quick glance with Melissa before clearing his throat. "We're restructuring some strategic priorities. As you know, Virion is entering a new phase of growth: external partnerships, investor engagement, platform scalability. And replacing me was part of that?" I cut in, tone flat. Jason raised a palm. All corporate calm. "We're transitioning leadership of SmartCare to Dr. Blake. His background in AI strategy aligns with where we're headed." "He hasn't written a line of code," I said. Blake shifted in his seat, but Jason continued without acknowledging the comment. "You've been an invaluable part of building the foundation, but scaling that foundation requires a different lens, one that bridges the gap between engineering and external positioning." Translation: I was too technical, too quiet, too inconvenient to parade in front of investors. Melissa slid the folder toward me. "The company is offering a transition support package, 3 months salary, full benefits. We'll need your credentials, access notes, and any documentation not yet in Confluence." I didn't touch the folder. "So you want me gone today, but you expect me to prep the man replacing me on the way out?" Jason's smile was thin. "Blake has already reviewed your codebase. This is more about knowledge continuity." I almost laughed. "He reviewed my codebase? That's like reading a book in Braille with oven mitts. Do you see?" Blake finally spoke. "Look, I respect what you've built, truly, but legacy systems have limitations. My job is to make it accessible, scalable." "Your job?" I repeated, the words like static in my throat. "You're here because I pitched this version 6 months ago and got told to shelve it. Now it's investor-friendly, so you get to be the face." "That's not fair," Blake began. "No," I said, voice rising. "What's not fair is being asked to surrender the thing I built from scratch, while the person who copied it gets applause in a room I wasn't even invited to." Jason stepped forward, his tone colder. "We're not here to debate fairness. Quinn, we're offering you a dignified exit and a generous package. But we need closure on this project. Today." A silence fell. I swallowed hard. My cheeks burned, but I refused to look away. This wasn't just a firing. It was a public undoing. A calculated extraction of everything I had poured into this company, sanitized and repackaged with a shinier label and a more marketable spokesperson. "I'll need time to review this," I said, nodding toward the folder but not touching it. "With legal?" "Of course," Melissa replied, tone rehearsed. "But we'll need your company laptop and badge before end of day." Jason gave a tight nod. "Let's make this smooth. Quinn, no need to complicate things." I looked at Blake one last time. His expression was carefully neutral, half sympathy, half discomfort. But I saw it. He wasn't sorry. He was settling in. I turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to keep my voice steady. "You're taking the system, but you don't have the keys, and you won't even know they're missing until it's too late," Jason called after me as I stepped out. "Quinn, access credentials, all of them." I didn't turn back. "Some doors you close gently, others you make sure they remember the sound." The door closed behind me with a soft click. No slamming, no theatrics. I walked back through the glass hallway like a ghost. People glanced up from their screens and quickly looked away, unsure whether to acknowledge me or pretend I was already gone. I didn't care. I didn't even feel anger. Not in the way people usually expect it. No fire, no storm, just a quiet pressure in my chest, steady and sharp, like a blade laid flat behind my ribs. By the time I reached the systems lab, I'd already made my decision. I packed my things slowly. One mug, one photo frame. My notepad. No one said a word. Jenna peeked over once, then ducked behind her screen. I placed my company laptop on the desk, as requested, but I didn't touch my personal machine. That one had come with me when I started at Virion, and I had never used it for anything but system simulations and private sandbox models, which made it the perfect place to do what I was about to do. I slipped into the secondary server room, smaller than the main data center, but quieter, more personal. I had practically lived in this space during SmartCare's early development. The hum of stacked hardware and the subtle vibration of running systems felt more familiar than my own apartment. I plugged in, launched a secure session, and opened Neurodetect's authentication matrix, not the public layers, not the sanitized API endpoints, or the investor-friendly dashboards Blake had probably flipped through like a glossy brochure. I opened the core, a proprietary neural inference engine, trained, tested, and tuned by me over 3 years. Its design wasn't documented in any shared repo. Its versioning didn't appear in any formal logs. It didn't even use company standard encryption. It was mine, built offline, trained offline, and most importantly, controlled offline. Neurodetect's deep learning stack contained a latent protocol. An autonomous mode switch triggered when authentication tokens expired without a valid override. On paper, it was a safety net, a failsafe to prevent external tampering in the event of compromise. In reality, it was leverage. Every 24 hours, the system pinged a unique biometric hash tied to my credentials. Without it, certain diagnostic modules would gradually throttle down. Not fail, not crash, just degrade, quietly, undetectably, until accuracy reports began to wobble, inference speeds lagged, and outputs became statistically unreliable. They wouldn't notice it at first. But the hospitals would, and the investors. I encrypted the latest control state and copied it to my personal drive. Then I closed the session and wiped the logs, not sloppily, not in a way that looked suspicious, just clean, quiet, unremarkable. I shut down the monitor, sat in the stillness for a moment, and let the coldness settle inside me like a second spine. They thought they could replace me. They thought the system I built would keep running just because they slapped a new label on it and handed it to a man with a sharper suit and a louder voice. But the thing they didn't understand was this. I hadn't just built smart care. I had woven myself into it. My instincts, my judgment, my fingerprints in every neural weight. Without me, the system could walk. Sure, but it couldn't run. And soon enough, they were going to learn what that felt like. The first text came at 6:18 a.m. Hey, are you seeing this? SmartCare flagged a stage 4 cancer alert on a broken wrist case. No metastasis, no indicators, just a full oncology workup out of nowhere. It was from Raj, one of the clinical integration engineers who used to report to me. I hadn't heard from him since the day I was transitioned. 10 minutes later, another ping. Systems acting weird. Diagnostics running out of sequence. Pediatric scans being routed through the cardiac model. Something's off. I didn't respond. Just watched the messages pile up as the alert stream swelled into something harder to ignore. By 7:05 a.m., I was sipping coffee in my kitchen, scrolling through the logs they didn't know I could still see. The pattern was obvious. Neurodetect's modules were beginning to stagger. A minor misclassification here. A 1.2-second delay in inference response there. Nothing catastrophic. Not yet. But cumulative? It would erode clinical confidence faster than a breach. By 7:26 a.m., the error reports reached the executive tier. That's when the phone rang. Blocked number. Of course. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. On the fourth call, I answered. Quinn, Jason said, skipping pleasantries. His voice was clipped, tight. We're seeing some inconsistencies with the SmartCare rollout. Diagnostic alerts are misfiring. Several hospital admins have flagged it. I let the silence stretch. We need you to take a look, he added, softer. Just a quick review of the inference protocols. You know the system better than anyone. Isn't that what you have Dr. Blake for? I asked calmly. A pause. He's working on it, but there are issues with access credentials. Some of the deeper modules are locked behind dependencies he can't trace. Interesting, I murmured, almost like someone embedded protocol-level restrictions requiring a master key. Jason sighed. Quinn, please. This isn't about politics. Patients are involved, and yes, this is critical. Ah, the pivot to urgency. The appeal to professionalism. I knew this dance, and I wasn't unfeeling. The last thing I wanted was actual harm, but I also wasn't a martyr. I'll need a consulting agreement, I said flatly. Triple my former salary, full autonomy, access to my own sandbox. No Blake, no layers of red tape. Jason didn't even argue. I'll have legal send something within the hour. I hung up and set my coffee down. It tasted better than it had in weeks. 15 minutes later, a fresh access key landed in my inbox. Along with a stripped-down remote login, I connected to the core, ran a deep integrity check, and watched the audit light up like a Christmas tree. Of course, Blake had tried to modify my architecture, probably in a panic, trying to override the degradation protocols without understanding how they triggered. In doing so, he'd corrupted the rule hierarchy that governed diagnostic prioritization. The system wasn't broken. It was reacting exactly as designed, shutting down logic it could no longer verify. By 8:42 a.m., I'd patched the worst of it. No grand announcement, no parade, just silent recovery. By 9:00, the alert stopped. At 9:04, my phone buzzed again. System stabilized, thanks. Jason wants to talk next steps. I ignored it. Instead, I opened the real-time performance dashboard, the one Blake had proudly presented 2 days ago. His name was still attached as lead architect, but it was my code that had just saved them, my system that hadn't collapsed under sabotage, my design that had resisted its hijacking long enough to force their hand. I didn't need a headline. I didn't need revenge. The logs would tell the story for me, for the first time since this began. I allowed myself a small smile. Because vindication doesn't always come in applause. Sometimes, It arrives as a silent, blinking green light, marking the moment your replacement fails and your legacy holds. At 9:17 a.m., Jason called again. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the internal status dashboard roll from red to yellow, then to green, each system flickering back online, one service at a time, like a heartbeat restarting, slowly, reluctantly. My code wasn't just functioning again, it was proving a point. At 9:32, Ava texted, Jason's in with legal. Can you talk in 15? I let 10 minutes pass before replying. Send me the draft first. By 9:55, a PDF hit my inbox. Independent Consulting Agreement. Quinn Rivers. I read through it while finishing my second coffee. Most of it was boilerplate. Terms, confidentiality, scope. They were offering a 6-month contract, remote only, full admin access to the system, and a triple increase from my previous salary. Not bad, but not enough. I opened the doc, inserted 3 changes, and hit reply. Ownership of all custom diagnostic protocols I personally developed, including Neurodetect Core and Predictive Inference Stack. No reporting line to Jason, direct alignment with the CTO, 1-year term, minimum, non-cancelable except for cause. I added a 4th, for my own satisfaction, public acknowledgement in investor materials that Neurodetect was architected and implemented by Quinn Rivers. At 10:13 a.m., Jason called again. This time, I answered. You've got my edit, I said before he could speak. I've seen them, he replied, his voice flat. The board is reviewing. No rush, I said lightly. But I'd move quickly. My inbox has been very active this morning. Apparently, a few hospitals are considering pulling their pilot contracts unless the system stabilizes and stays stable. Silence. Then, we've already had 3 escalation calls. One from Clearwater Medical. One from a group in Boston. So I heard, I said. You know what else I heard? They're starting to ask who wrote the core model. One of them asked directly if Blake was the original designer. Jason exhaled slowly. Fine. Terms accepted. Legal will finalize. But Quinn. His tone shifted. Softer now. Almost cautious. Don't take this personally. The situation escalated. Fast. We needed someone who could move quickly. Handle the optics. You were too close to it. I built it, I said flatly. Being close wasn't the problem. It was the value you assigned to silence. I didn't mean, but you did, I cut in. You thought something shiny and external would impress the board more than institutional memory and technical depth. You gambled on a narrative, and now you're dealing with reality. He said nothing, so I delivered the final nail. Calmly, clearly. You don't need to believe I'm the best person for the job. You just need to understand that the system knows I am, because I trained it that way. Jason didn't argue. He just said, contract will be signed before noon. At 10:46 a.m., the final version arrived. Every clause exactly as I requested. The title, Senior Technical Consultant. Diagnostic Systems. Reporting directly to CTO. 1-year commitment. Full IP protections. And a footnote clause stating publicly that foundational AI models currently deployed under Varian SmartCare were originally developed by Ms. Quinn Rivers. I signed. Felt nothing. No triumph. No vindication. Just clarity. By 11:02 a.m., I reconnected to the system. This time, it welcomed me. No blocked credentials. No throttled performance. Just clean, stable access to everything that mattered. I spent the next 2 hours rerouting core functions, locking down the override pathways Blake had tampered with, and restoring the fallback protocols he'd tried to bypass. I didn't delete his changes. I simply moved them to an isolated environment. Read-only, sandboxed, labeled clearly. Experimental, uncertified. Let him find it later. By 1:10 p.m., Neurodetect was fully operational, stable, functional, safe. At 1:42, Ava sent one last message. Investor meeting just wrapped. Jason name-dropped you as lead consultant and credited the system turnaround to your emergency intervention. I smiled faintly. He could rewrite the press release however he wanted. The logs told the truth. And now, so would the contract. It started with a budget line item. A minor adjustment, just 3%. Flagged in a routine finance update I almost ignored. Reallocation from systems and diagnostics R&D to innovation lab expansion. No names, no notes, no justification. But I knew the handwriting. At Virion, nothing ever started with a confrontation. It began with reshuffling, renaming, rebranding. I dug deeper. By the end of the day, I'd found 3 more indicators: a procurement freeze on diagnostic tooling, a postponed training session my team had scheduled with QA, and a forwarded email chain from a sympathetic project manager that ended with, "Let's hold until Dr. Blake weighs in." Blake. He'd vanished from direct communication after the system failure. Publicly, he was on special assignment, helping explore new growth strategies. But now he was reappearing, not in code or documentation, but in the margins. Strategic influence. He couldn't beat me in implementation. He knew that. So now he was coming for perception. I felt it first in meetings. CTO Daniel would glance at me when certain slide titles came up. Platform transparency, auditable logic, compliance readiness. Each time, his eyes would flicker, unsure, like someone who had seen something but wasn't sure whether to say it. The next sign came 2 days later, when Ava forwarded a new pitch deck intended for the board's quarterly session, Beyond Legacy, a vision for explainable AI in clinical settings. Blake's name was on the title page. The content was sleek, polished, dangerous. It positioned Virion's current architecture, my architecture, as a legacy black box, emphasizing the need for systems that could be interpreted, audited, and rebuilt in full alignment with modern compliance demands. It was subtle, but sharp. He wasn't attacking me directly. He was attacking the nature of what I'd built, and with enough distance from his earlier screw-up, he could plausibly spin this as strategic evolution, not retaliation. Classic. By the time I reached page 19, my heart was pounding. Current AI frameworks lack the transparency necessary to meet next-generation regulatory standards. We must invest now in ground-up rebuilds with explainability-first principles. I knew what he was doing. He was softening the ground, preparing for a future where my system was labeled outdated, dangerous, and then removed. It didn't matter that Neurodetect had stabilized, that hospitals were finally gaining confidence again. Blake was reframing the problem, turning engineering into ideology, and people listened to ideology when they didn't understand code. For the first time in weeks, I couldn't focus. My team noticed. Raj asked twice if I was okay. I said I was tired. Lisa from QA dropped off a performance summary and lingered a second too long before walking away. Paranoia isn't loud. It's a whisper behind every compliment. A question mark behind every nod. Was Daniel hesitating in meetings because he didn't trust me, or because he'd seen Blake's deck? Was Ava still on my side, or just relaying what she had to? And most dangerous of all, was the board beginning to believe that Blake had a point? That I was the risk? The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built Neurodetect to anticipate anomalies, mitigate chaos, reduce uncertainty. Now the chaos was human, and the anomaly was me. At 8:13 p.m., I reopened the budget spreadsheet. This time, I didn't just scan. I audited, line by line, week by week. I built a timeline of adjustments, reallocations, temporary freezes, and paused approvals. The pattern was there, faint but traceable. Every move framed as optimization, but all pointing to a slow starvation of my department, a political chokehold disguised as efficiency. He was betting I wouldn't notice until it was too late. that by the time I fought back, the perception would have shifted, that I'd be painted as defensive, territorial, a technical relic clinging to the past. And worst of all, he might be right. Unless I changed the narrative, I closed the spreadsheet, locked my machine, and sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of what was coming settle. This wasn't a glitch I could patch. This was a campaign. Blake hadn't just returned. He was already inside the walls. I first heard her name from Raj. "Have you met Liana yet?" he asked, leaning against my office doorframe like he was dropping something casual. She just onboarded with Risk and Audit, ex-WHO. Apparently, she wrote the compliance playbook half these guys quote like scripture. I looked up from the spreadsheet I'd been dissecting for days. No. Why? He shrugged. Word is she's sharp. And not exactly a Blake fan. That got my attention. I did some checking. Liana Song, former lead AI compliance officer at the World Health Organization, had overseen system audits in 20 countries, worked with both NGOs and defense sectors, respected, feared, a little mythologized. But more importantly, she was in the building, and 2 days later, I saw her. She was in the server room, of all places, not where Risk usually went. Black slacks, high-neck blazer, silver-streaked hair pulled into a braid so sharp it looked structural. Her eyes moved like scanners, efficient, measuring everything. I introduced myself. Quinn Rivers, extending a hand. "I know," she replied, shaking it firmly. "You're the one who built the black box that's somehow outperforming every explainable model in market trials." I arched an eyebrow. "That a compliment?" She smiled. "That's a challenge." We sat down over coffee in the quiet corner of the diagnostics floor. Neutral territory. I expected guarded professionalism. What I got instead was something more dangerous. Curiosity. "You've seen Blake's deck," I said. She nodded. "Multiple versions. The one he sent to the board, the one he floated to marketing, and the one he pitched to me, off the record." I froze. "He approached you?" "Indirectly. Asked for an internal audit of Neurodetect's early logic pathing, claimed it was in the interest of transparency. And then I ran a comparative audit on the flagged misfires from the week you were consulting, but not yet reinstated." Her fingers tapped a rhythm on the side of her cup. "Someone modified the testing environment," she continued. "Created false inconsistencies by feeding mismatched patient data through a stripped-down interface of your model." My stomach dropped. "Let me guess," I said quietly. "Blake framed the results as proof that the system was too opaque for clinical deployment." She nodded once. "That's why your outputs looked skewed in his deck. The errors weren't organic. They were engineered." I felt a sick mix of relief and fury. "Can you prove it?" She met my eyes. "I already have." I exhaled. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in my chest eased. "Why tell me?" "Because I don't like systems being weaponized to win politics," she said simply. "And I've seen what happens when decision-makers favor optics over outcome. Your model isn't the problem. The fact that it works better than his is..." I studied her. "And if I wanted to counterattack?" She tilted her head slightly. "Legally? You could go to the board, but they'll flinch. They always do when internal sabotage is involved, especially from someone with Stanford credentials and a good haircut." I smirked despite myself. "Strategically?" I asked. "Expose the pattern. Don't defend yourself, defend the data. Show where his audit failed. Show how his changes created the very problems he used as leverage. Turn his case into a cautionary tale." I leaned forward. "Would you help me do that?" She finished her coffee, set it down, and stood. "I already am." That night, we worked side by side in the quiet glass-paneled war room overlooking the server hub. Liana pulled log records. I pulled architecture overlays. Raj joined us after hours with interface data. We rebuilt the story line by line, timestamp by timestamp, and what emerged wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a blueprint for reversal. Every false flag Blake had raised, We traced them to his own sandbox. Every mismatch, a deliberate rerouting. By midnight, we had a clean, annotated timeline. Cross-verified, legally defensible, technically irrefutable. I looked at Liana across the table. I thought I was going to have to survive this alone, I admitted. You still might, she replied. But now you won't have to fight it blind. And for the first time in a long, exhausting war of postures and silence, I felt something unfamiliar settle beneath my ribs. Hope, not the naive kind, not optimism, but strategic hope, the kind that comes when the pieces start to shift, and the board doesn't know it yet. But their golden consultant had just become a liability. The plan wasn't to go loud. Not yet. This wasn't about grandstanding or public confrontation. It was about precision, collecting facts like blades and placing them, one by one, where they could cut cleanest. We started the next morning. Liana and I assembled a task group under the guise of a performance stabilization initiative. Raj gathered interface logs. Lisa pulled behavior flags. Our lead infrastructure engineer rerouted system mirroring to a protected sandbox so we could trace anomalies in real time. Undisturbed, unfiltered. For 4 days, we lived in that room. No leaks. No chatter, just lines of time-stamped evidence, growing by the hour. And Blake never suspected. He'd spent years building his credibility on a single premise, that no one would ever check his numbers too closely, because he looked like someone who didn't need to lie. He'd been wrong. By day 5, we had everything. We mapped 37 instances where SmartCare's behavior had deviated from baseline. Of those 34 had been seeded directly from Blake's testing environments, instances where he'd deliberately overridden standard input protections to reroute incompatible datasets through non-matching modules. A forced mismatch, one designed to produce failure. And worse? He'd cleared the internal flags after each injection, erasing the trail from the live interface, but not from the server logs. Because while he'd wiped front-end records, he hadn't touched the mirrored authentication pings. Liana found them buried 3 layers deep, residual key calls issued under a masked session, his digital fingerprints, left behind like ghost signatures. I stared at the screen when she pulled them up, glowing orange in our audit interface. "Are you absolutely sure?" I asked. Liana nodded. I cross-referenced against his workstation ID. The same session also accessed DevOps notes that only Blake had clearance for. There's no other explanation. He didn't just manipulate the data, he staged the entire scenario. I sat back in my chair. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't angry. I was done reacting. Now I was moving. That night, I compiled our findings into a formal report. Not a memo, not a complaint, an audit. Complete with appendices, log chains, before and after comparisons, user credentials, and a supplemental video walkthrough narrated by Liana herself. No commentary, no accusations, just evidence. I submitted it to the board at 8:47 a.m. sharp, routed through a direct compliance channel that bypassed Jason entirely. At 9:03, I got a read receipt from the audit chair. At 9:16, a second read from the board secretary. By 9:44, Ava forwarded me a calendar invite for a closed-door session scheduled that afternoon. The subject line was short. Internal security review, SmartCare deployment. No one had called me. No one had acknowledged the file. But I didn't need them to. The system would speak for itself now. I looked around our makeshift war room, whiteboards still covered in sequence diagrams, coffee cups pushed to corners, digital logs scrolling quietly across the monitors. Raj was debugging a test loop. Liana was annotating a timeline. Lisa was reviewing a regression plot with clinical outcomes flagged. This was no longer a defense. It was a reckoning. And we were ready. The glass doors shut behind me with a soft hiss. Inside, the boardroom was all chrome and quiet tension. 12 chairs around a long oval table. Polished surfaces, immaculate suits, and expressions that tried very hard not to look surprised. Jason sat at the far end, flanked by the audit chair and Virion's general counsel. His face was unreadable, but his hands were clasped too tightly on the table. Dr. Blake was absent. Strategic. Or cowardly. Probably both. I took the open seat near the center. Ava handed me a water bottle I didn't touch. I didn't need comfort. I needed clarity. The board chair cleared his throat. Ms. Rivers, thank you for joining us on short notice. We've reviewed the preliminary materials submitted through compliance channels. You'll have 15 minutes to walk us through your findings. I nodded. I'll need 8. I tapped my tablet, and the monitor behind me lit up. No frills. No drama. Just a live dashboard pulled from our secured audit sandbox. Let me be clear, I began. The errors reported in the last SmartCare update cycle were not organic. They weren't due to black box opacity, nor failure of core architecture. I advanced to the first log screen. They were fabricated, created through deliberate misuse of input routing by an external consultant acting without engineering clearance. A few board members leaned forward. The general counsel narrowed her eyes. I continued, voice steady. Dr. Blake injected non-standard data into live sim environments. He stripped away context tags, rerouted patient archetypes, and ran logic trees through incomplete modules. The errors generated from these manipulations were then compiled into a pitch deck, presented as proof that the system was inherently unstable. I paused, letting the weight of it land. The logs don't lie. Each action is time-stamped, workstation authenticated, and matches Blake's unique session ID across 3 mirrored servers. I tapped again. The audit chair squinted at the slide. This is one of 34 matched incidents, I said. We've annotated each with before and after states and corresponding impact assessments. None of these anomalies occurred in production environments. Only in the sandbox Blake controlled. Silence. Not disbelief, just calculation. The board wasn't shocked. They were assessing fallout. Finally, the audit chair spoke. And your system, NeuroDetect, is currently stable? Yes, I said. Since reinstatement, we've restored all core modules and closed all unauthorized pathways. Current hospital deployments are operating at 98.7% inference efficiency. And Blake's proposed rebuild? I looked him in the eye. Based on manipulated data, risky, reputationally and clinically. Jason finally spoke. Let's be careful with our language. Dr. Blake's intentions may have been self-serving, I cut in, and unethical. Let's call it what it is. He went quiet again. The board chair folded his hands. Effective immediately. We are suspending the SmartCare 2. Zero Rebuild Initiative. All consultant privileges associated with Dr. Blake are revoked, pending a formal investigation. Jason flinched, but said nothing. We'll also be restructuring the Diagnostic Systems Division. The chair continued. Ms. Rivers, we'd like a proposal by end of week for a permanent governance framework, one led internally, with full transparency protocols. I nodded once, calm, controlled, but inside, something uncoiled. Not triumph, not vengeance, justice. I stood, gathered my notes, and met the room's gaze one last time. This wasn't about protecting my code, I said. It was about protecting the truth. Then I walked out, head high, hands steady, no longer fighting for a seat at the table. I was redesigning the table itself. The offer came in at 6:42 a.m. Subject line, Executive Appointment. Chief AI Officer. The message was short, direct. A formal letter from the board, inviting me to take full leadership of all AI systems at Virion. Not just SmartCare, not just NeuroDetect, all of it. Reporting directly to the board. No more middlemen, no more Jason. I read the offer twice, then once more. By the time the office stirred awake, the news had spread. Jason was gone. Blake's contract had been terminated, effective immediately, pending further review. And the department I'd built from the shadows had been renamed AI Systems and Architecture Division. It had my name on the org chart, a new title, a new remit. A full team. growing, respected, but I didn't feel triumphant. There was no adrenaline rush, no victory lap, just a quiet clarity that something hard-fought had come to an end, and something new was beginning. Later that morning, Daniel, the CTO, stopped by my office. "Congratulations," he said, with a small smile that didn't feel forced. "You earned this." I gave a half smile back. "Feels strange." "How so?" I looked around, at the walls I'd once sat behind as a sidelined engineer, and now stood in as an executive. "I thought I'd feel more satisfied." He nodded. "That's because you didn't win by crushing anyone. You won by outlasting. There's a difference." After he left, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I opened NeuroDetect, the core code, the real version, the one no one had touched but me. I scrolled through the scripts, the hidden modules, the adaptive learning weights that had taken years to fine-tune. It was beautiful, intricate, mine, but it couldn't stay that way forever. Systems don't grow in shadows, and neither do people. I created a new branch, ND Core Training V1. Not the full source. Some parts were still too sensitive, but enough. Enough to understand the architecture, to study the logic, to carry it forward without needing me in the room. Then I pinged Raj. "Let's talk succession. It's time we start training someone to lead NeuroDetect V3. He replied almost instantly. "Seriously?" "Seriously." I locked the branch, wrote the documentation myself, and sent it to the training group that afternoon. When Liana saw the commit, she walked straight into my office. "You're giving this away?" "Not giving," I said. "Building a bridge." "Even after what they did?" "Especially after." She studied me for a long beat, then smiled. "You're going to be a different kind of executive." "I hope so," I said quietly. That evening, I watched the office empty out from the same glass wall I once stood behind. Uninvited, unseen. Now they saw me. And more importantly, they saw what I'd built, not just a system, but a legacy with room to evolve, one that no longer had to be guarded, because it was ready to be shared.